Have you ever set a boundary and then suddenly you are the difficult one or you are too much?
That's usually the moment you stop being convenient and the other person realizes the rules have changed. I think people assume that boundary testing is always malicious, but it's not. Many times it's curiosity. Is she serious?
So, wait a minute. Quentin, are you saying that someone is saying, is this really a boundary or is this temporary? Let me test it.
Exactly. Humans test information. If you think of children, they test their bedtime. If
Mm.
you say 8 o'clock is the bedtime, they will test that boundary.
Mm.
In the same way, adults test boundaries and they test it in various ways. Some go quiet, they show up late, they push a topic just to see what happens.
So let me get this straight. If the boundary disappears under pressure, then it wasn't a boundary to start with in the first place.
That's the key. The test isn't about words, it's about following through.
And as women struggle with the follow through because we feel guilty, right, ladies? How many of you have felt guilty to say no and you don't want to upset the person, you don't want to trigger conflict, and heaven forbid, you really don't want this person to leave, especially if you like them and you're invested in them. And the irony is that's exactly why we need boundaries.
Exactly. A boundary you don't keep becomes permission.
And I suppose the testing just gets worse and worse after that first time that you buckled.
The cleanest boundaries are calm, not emotional, and not a speech. It's consistent.
Mm.
The key is about consistency. And if you're not open to that, then you're not open. Then they can't push that boundary because there's consistency.
Yeah. And what I've seen is that the right person will then adjust,
Mhm.
but the wrong person turns around and then they try and negotiate access to you again for their own convenience. And it's convenient that you just adjust to them all the time. And now suddenly that's not the case. And what I've seen is then they turn around and they make you wrong. You are dramatic. You are overbearing. You're not a good friend. You've changed. What's happened? Who's whispered in your ear? Why are you so difficult, so emotional, or whatever the labels are? But that's because you've stopped their convenience and you've changed the rules.
Yes, which is manipulation disguised as feedback. But let's look at it from a different perspective. Let me give you an example. Think about a person we all know, someone whose yes is yes and their no is no.
Mm.
And simply, if they feel, I can't do that,
Mm.
they don't over explain, they don't make excuses.
Mm.
They just say, I can't do that. The difference is they are consistent. And therefore, you trust it.
Okay, I think now I understand. And we all know a person like that.
Mm.
And like you say, we respect them and we trust them and we feel more safe around them
Mm.
because they are consistent. But now, on the other hand, how many of us struggle with that consistency because we feel guilty to say no and we over explain? I'm a culprit of that one, explaining why I can't. Or worse, you just tolerate it, just give in.
Mm.
And then that's the inconsistency that actually doesn't make it a boundary. You are consistent and people realize that you're consistent, the testing will stop because then the boundary is actually in place, right?
Yes, Ilse, that's exactly that.
Mm.
So the real shift is not about learning to argue your boundaries better.
Mm.
It's about becoming that person whose yes is yes and whose no is no. At first, it might feel uncomfortable, as many of us have learned that we need to soften our no in order not to disappoint other people.
Very true.
By the moment your behavior becomes calm and consistent, people stop testing it.
Well, thank you for this. I think it's been such a valuable discussion because lots of people talk about boundaries, but there's not a lot of clarity about how do you enforce a boundary or set a boundary. And I think it's often mistaken as you have to communicate it and reinforce it. And what I'm hearing today, it's much more about your behavior than your words. And not only your behavior, but actually consistent behavior. And that puts a boundary in place. And that is respecting yourself. And it is from day one, it's not down the line. So thank you very much. I think it brought a lot of clarity today.
I'm glad it helped. And if you want to understand how these patterns start in the first place, I want you to watch our video on teaching people how to treat you.
So subscribe and follow our series on self-respect and boundaries to start learning to be a consistent boundary setter. See you in the next one.